The following podcast is brought to you by PeacemakerNetwork.com. PeacemakerNetwork.com. Audio is provided by Pixabay.com. That's Pixabay.com.
Well, now that the Karen Reed murder trial is over with a not guilty verdict, just what are the key people saying about the trial? We're going to talk about this and the aftermath of the Karen Reed murder trial. We're going to cover this and a whole lot more on this episode of Charlie Crimebuster. It is what some people will are calling it the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals participating and do not represent those of city, county, state, or federal law enforcement agencies nor sponsors and platforms of this presentation. All individuals described or mentioned in this presentation should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This presentation contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Charlie Crimebuster podcast. We are glad to have you on board the Charlie Crime Train today. This past week, there was a verdict in the Karen Reed murder trial. The second one, that is. She was found not guilty on the serious charges and only guilty for what we know of as a DUI. They call it OUI up there. But what are other people saying now? Now that it's all over, what are the main people that were involved in this whole trial saying about that verdict? Well, we're going to cover that right now in today's episode. But first, let me say, if you are a first-time listener or you're a seasoned listener, go ahead and reach out with a shout-out. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach me directly, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Ask questions, make suggestions about other podcasts, even disagree with what we say. We would love to hear from you, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com, and thank you so much for those of you who do respond and reach out. By the way, we'll also invite you to go on over and check out our sponsor, PeacemakerNetwork.com. There you're going to find about the brave men and women who run toward danger instead of away from danger. You can become a part of helping to support those kind of people. Yes, I'm talking about those brave men and women of the military, law enforcement, and of course, the courageous first responders. Read all about it, PeacemakerNetwork.com. If you'd like to get caught up on the other episodes and do binge casting, as our sponsor James Buckland calls it, just jump on over to charliecrimebuster.com or go to YouTube and just slash it Charlie Crimebuster. And my friend, you're going to find over 300 podcasts ready for your listening enjoyment. If you are a crime junkie, then my friend, you're going to love going to either one of those places and getting caught up. All right, now that we've got some housekeeping out of the way, let's get right down to it. We all know now that the Massachusetts State Police and law enforcement in general, well, they certainly got a black eye out of this case. There was a poorly protected crime scene. You remember that, right? The failure to even check the house where something could have happened inside that house. The failure to separate the witnesses. Failure to maintain proper chain of custody of evidence. And that's not even counting that they captured key evidence through red Solo cups and even used a leaf blower over the snow that even a common person who's had no training in criminal analysis whatsoever, well, they would have been realizing that that could blow away important evidence. Yes, it was a sloppy investigation. And many people are saying that that is the main reason for the reasonable doubt in this case. So let me ask you a question. What does the Massachusetts State Police say about this? Well, on the tail of the verdict, surprisingly, the Massachusetts State Police spoke out. They responded. Actually, they responded pretty quickly. Colonel Jeffrey Noble, he acknowledged that in the past 3 years, well, that there have been challenges that the state police has been facing. And it says it's now time to reflect on the actions, and he said to bolster training and accountability. He said all of this just one day after Karen Reed's acquittal on that murder and manslaughter charge. He suggested that Reed's high-profile case, well, that it motivated the agency to do some soul-searching. Now, of course, they did extend the sincere condolences to the loved ones of Boston police officer John O'Keefe. But he went on to say that the events of the last 3 years, he said, it's challenged our department. It's challenged us to do a thoroughly review of our actions. And it's caused us to take concrete steps to deliver advanced investigative training. He also talked about appropriate oversight and accountability. Now, that was from the Massachusetts State Police itself, but some of you say, well, wait a minute. That's not the statement that I read from the Massachusetts State Police. And that's understandable, because there was another form that came from the Massachusetts State Police Association. And, my friend, that is 2 different organizations. You see, you do have the Massachusetts State Police that said, we want to learn from this, but the Massachusetts State Police Association? Well, that's not the same thing as the Massachusetts State Police. You see, it's just like you have the PBA, the Police Officer Benevolent Association, or you have the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police. Those are police unions that always stand behind the brave men and women of law enforcement. And they have a whole different idea about what took place. In fact, they are saying, well, let me tell you exactly what they did say. Here's their own statement, quite different from what the Maryland State Police said, who vowed to learn from the Karen Reed investigation. The State Police Association of Massachusetts released a statement this Saturday. And they said, of course, that they do, too, send condolences to O'Keefe's family. And they said that they accept the outcome of Reed's trial. But, get this, they are not apologizing for their police work. The statement actually called out abuse that the Massachusetts State Police officers have been receiving from the public. They included talking about numerous attacks and numerous accusations of wrongdoing. Part of their statement said, quote, as our current and former members continue to be the subjects of baseless accusations, it is important to remember that into the death of John O'Keefe, that has already been investigated with great scrutiny. First of all, from the members of the State Police Internal Affairs and also the FBI. Basically, the Massachusetts Police Association says they don't care what the jury decided. They say their officers did their job, no matter what the jury thinks. So that's the way the association has reacted in the aftermath. Now, we all know that when we talk about this investigation, we cannot get away from the Proctor factor. So let me ask you this. In the aftermath of this verdict, what did Trooper Michael Proctor have to say? We all know that the text that he actually sent out to friends, well, we know that became a very real part of the trial. And even though he did not testify in the second trial, those texts became a very important part of the second trial as well. Remember? He actually called Reed a whack job, and then used a very vulgar term to refer to her, called her retarded, made vulgar remarks about her appearance, even about her chronic medical condition, joked about searching for nude photos on her cell phone. Yep, those messages, they gave Reed's defense team some real evidence for them to argue that the investigators were biased against Reed from the start. In fact, you remember Alan Jackson, Karen Reed's lead defense attorney? He stated Proctor is a cancer that touched everything about this case. He mentioned that in this second trial, the prosecution did not even call to stand the lead prosecutor to the stand. And then he said, that should stop you in your tracks. So there was plenty said about Proctor in the trial, but what does Proctor have to say now that the verdict has been rendered? Well, former Massachusetts State Police Trooper Michael Proctor, he literally laughed at the notion that he tried to frame Karen Reed back in 2022 when John O'Keefe died. In an interview which aired this past Thursday night, Proctor talked about the accusations that he was corrupt and that he deliberately tried to frame Reed. He said, "I laugh because it's such a ridiculous accusation." That's what he said on NBC's Dateline. Then he went on to say there is not one piece of evidence or fact to support that. Because it did not happen, I would never do something like that. He was even asked in the interview if he cracked the taillight on Reed's Lexus. Proctor's response? Absolutely not. Now, we do know that he did share those derogatory texts. And he even said that he wished that Reed would kill herself, in addition to joking about looking for those nude selfies. But even though he did all that, get this now, Proctor told Dateline that he thought he should get his job back. He went on to talk about the fact that before this case, he never had a single complaint, that he had never been subject to any disciplinary actions. He said that all of his employee evaluations were either outstanding or excellent. And then he said to the people, "I still love the job. I still want to be a trooper, and I'm fighting for it." He said he was going through the appeals process even now. But now he did say something about those terrible text messages. And he might get some people saying. He said, "What is in your private phone? If people took your personal phone, what would they find? Have you ever had a moment of a poor lapse of judgment when you were just airing stuff out on your personal phone with an expectation of privacy in that little device?" He said, "But I did. He said he allowed his emotions to get too involved when he sent those texts. He said that he expressed those emotions in a very negative way that he should not have done. He said, I should not have been texting my friends anyhow. They are what they are. They do not define me as a person, but they are regrettable." So that's what Mr. Michael Proctor had to say about this verdict. So let's also talk about the friends and relatives of Boston police officer John O'Keefe. Now, one thing that has pretty well been agreeable by both sides is that John O'Keefe was a great guy. He did not deserve to die. And many people are all crying for justice for John O'Keefe. But in this group of people, what about those people that are his friends? What about those people that are his relatives? How do they feel about this jury verdict? Well, according to responses from relatives and friends, they believe that the acquittal of Karen Reed was unjust. And they're saying that the celebrations that went on after it, when people were yelling and cheering like they were at a ball game and out tailgating, said, well, literally, that was disgusting. And that it really did. You could tell by the way they were talking, it really did disturb them. There was a college pal by the name of John Jackson. He said O'Keefe's family heard Reed supporters cheer when that retrial ended with a not guilty verdict on second-degree murder and manslaughter charges. And again, he used those words, it was disgusting. Now, something else you should know. A joint statement signed by O'Keefe supporters, including Jennifer McCabe, who did testify about the night that O'Keefe was found dead, they have all said that they would have much more to say later. And that statement actually blamed Reed's defense team and media members for participating, now get this, here's a quote, a devastating miscarriage of justice. And we now know that O'Keefe's family, they have now filed civil suits against Reed and those 2 bars that was accused of serving her on the night that O'Keefe died. So let me ask you a question. Do you see where the sides are still lined up on this thing, even though there has been a verdict? Now, there's somebody else that's been pretty quiet about this whole thing. John O'Keefe was found on the lawn of Brian Albert. What does Brian Albert and his family think about the verdict? I'm going to tell you about what they think about it. I'm also going to tell you about what the star defense attorney says, Alan Jackson. Now remember, they were under a gag order during the trial, so you did not hear from Alan Jackson, but now we have heard from him, and he is speaking loud and clear about this trial. I'm going to tell you all about that in a moment. But right now, it's time for us to pause for just a moment and share with you what we call Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Well, our Crazy Crook story today comes about a man from, Canada. You see, they not only have Crazy Crooks in America, they even come out of Canada, although this happened here in the United States. Now, we know that typically thieves do not like to attract attention to themselves, but sometimes they're just not quite as bright as they should be. And this involves a truck driver. 49-year-old Mark Delarge of Alberta, Canada, he may feel a little bit dumb at this moment. And he definitely did not keep his cool during a traffic stop that happened on Interstate 15 south of Las Vegas. You see, Delarge was caught speeding in a semi-truck. That's right, big semi-truck. Officers shared that he was going 75 miles per hour in a 55 mile per hour work zone. And the trucker told officers that he was returning to Canada and California. But you see, he seemed to be very nervous. Even his hands were shaking. And according to a particular publication, officers called for a narcotics detector dog to search the truck. And the hardworking canine officer, along with his dog, Detective Goodboy. Yep, Detective Goodboy. He alerted to odors of meth, heroin, and cocaine. Then Delarge knew that he was caught. He admitted to having cocaine in the rig. Police officers found, now listen to this, 200 pounds of cocaine and heroin hidden in several boxes. Then Delarge turns around and says to the officers, he said, I did do an internet search on how to smuggle drugs across the border. He said he browsed multiple websites, then found a contact with an individual on Facebook. Now, my friend, remember, James Buckland and I, we say often, hey, watch out for your digital footprint. Well, this guy's digital footprint got very large in this investigation. The individuals agreed to have Mark pick up the narcotics in the Riverside area, then drive them back to Canada. But now Mark, he faces 4 drug trafficking-related charges. Searching for how to smuggle drugs, that's like pointing a big, bright red arrow at himself. Then let me ask you another question. If you had that kind of narcotics on board, why in the world would you be speeding 15 miles per hour over the speed limit? So, my friend, this truck driver, who was dumb enough to search how to smuggle drugs on the internet, and also turned around and was speeding over 15 miles per hour over the speed limit, he is indeed Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. But now back to our main focus. The aftermath of the verdict in the Karen Reed murder case. You see, there's another group that did speak out after the verdict. They were witnesses in the first trial, but they were not called to the stand in the second trial, maybe with the exception of Jen McCabe. You see, the homeowner, Mr. Albert, and his family spoke out at a news interview. And they answered for me, Sergeant Albert did, he answered for me a question that I had about the case. And that question was this: when John O'Keefe was lying there on his lawn early in that snowy morning, why did the sergeant not come out on the front lawn when he learned that John O'Keefe was almost dead on his lawn that morning? He was a first responder, right? Now, that was made very plain in the trial. He did not come out, even though it was on his lawn. It appeared to many people to be suspicious activity. So Brian Albert, he speaks to ABC News on Thursday, and he tells us what really happened that morning. And he surprisingly says, I would have taken a bullet for John O'Keefe because he was a fellow cop. After all, O'Keefe was a 16-year veteran of the Boston Police Department, and Brian Albert himself was a sergeant, detective with the Boston Police Department. So he's there with his wife, Nicole, and other family members, and they deny allegations that Reed was framed in any kind of law enforcement cover-up. You see, we know that the defense lawyers, have suggested that O'Keefe met his fate inside 34 Fairview Road, arriving after an after party. But Albert, he was adamant that O'Keefe never entered the house. So there's been a lot of conspiracy theories. And Sergeant Albert, he addressed that too in his interview. He told ABC News' Matt Gutman, he said, you do realize for this conspiracy to be true, it would take 30 to 50 people. You'd have to have multiple cops on 2 different police departments, multiple civilians, the medical examiner, firemen, EMTs, you name it. He said that's how preposterous and silly that there was a conspiracy is. He went on to say he did not understand how people even bought this line in the first place. Now, we do know that, especially in the first trial, that they were actually trying to set Brian Albert up as a possible third-party suspect. So what really went on in the household that morning that John O'Keefe was found on the front lawn? Well, here's what they said went down. They said they only learned of O'Keefe's death after Reed and 2 other women, Carrie Roberts, Jennifer McCabe, Nicole's sister, after they found O'Keefe unresponsive on the snowy lawn. McCabe, she came into the bedroom early on January the 29th, and she was upset, he said, and I immediately thought something had happened to one of her kids, or maybe one of my kids, because why else would she be in my bedroom at 6:30 in the morning right now? She said, John's out front. John, I think John's dead out front. Brian Albert said, what? He said, what are you talking about, Jen? He said, I did not understand what she was talking about, because why would John be out in the front of my house? Now, we know the defense attorneys repeatedly mentioned that Brian Albert, a trained first responder, and they lambasted him because he didn't step outside and investigate or assist emergency crews. I've often wondered about that myself. And here's his answer. He said, I'm not a Canton Police Department, I'm a Boston Police Department officer. He said, I just woke up out of a cold sleep from hanging out the night before. And by the time he got downstairs, police were already in his house talking to him. John was already gone. There was nobody to save. And then he asks, what am I supposed to do? Run out front in my underwear? Start running yellow tape around the fire hydrant? You see, that would have been the job of the Canton Police Department or the Massachusetts State Police Department. What do you think about those words? Now, these families had already talked out, many of them, about how that they felt that this particular verdict was a miscarriage of justice. They went ahead to talk about how terrible they have been treated, that they have been called murderers, and speculations about O'Keefe's death. In fact, Matt McCabe said anybody who's touched his case has been called a murderer at some point. Anybody who's friends with us, they say that they are supporting cop killers. They've even received threats of violence. He said whether it's phone calls, text messages, emails, crazy Unabomber-type letters, to our own houses. And then he pointed out something else. He said, you know, the way that the defense went after the witnesses in this case, what is that going to mean about future trials? In fact, Mr. Albert's wife said, why would anybody want to be a witness after they see how they treated us? He went on to say the blueprint seemed to be pick out where this is, destroy their reputation, attack them, malign them, torture their kids, torture anybody who ever knew them, make them not testify, and while doing so, taint the jury pool. So there you have what Brian Albert thinks about the verdict. So now let's turn around and look at the other side a little bit. How about the star? Defense attorney Alan Jackson, who brought this case in behalf of Karen Reed, and he and his team secured a not guilty verdict. You see, he could not talk before because there's a gag order, but boy, he's talking now, and it will surprise you about some of the things that he is saying. He praised his client, and he took some big swings at both the judge and prosecutors. Alan Jackson said, this is the most challenging case I've ever had in my life. That's what he told local radio host Howie Carr on this past Thursday. And now I'm quoting him now, and he said, we didn't win it because of the process. We won it despite the process. Speaking to Carr, he said that he never doubted the evidence or Reed's innocence. And then he went by to say, well, I think we may be the only duo, a lawyer and client, who has gotten back-to-back acquittal on murder charges. Of course, he was referring to reports that jurors in Reed's first trial unofficially agreed to acquit her of second-degree murder and another charge. He also pointed out that when the new prosecutor, Hank Brennan, when he signed on to the case, he said he had two core obligations. Obligation number one was to make sure that Reed received a fair trial. Number two, to ensure facts surrounding O'Keefe's death were fully and fairly aired in the courtroom without outside influence. Jackson tells us now that that was just lip service. Yep, just lip service, he says. Just lip service. He said it was anything but what Brennan had said it would be. Now, he told Carr that he believes prosecutors did not want jurors to hear all the evidence. He went on to say, I can handle a prosecutor. I can meet most prosecutors with my hands behind my back. That's what he said. But then he said, the problem is when the judge is on the Commonwealth side, that makes life very guilty. He went on to allege, he alleged that Judge Beverly Cannon, who oversaw Reed's two trials, had a track record of bizarre rulings that benefited the prosecutors. He certainly seemed, he said, as though Judge Cannon had an idea of what she thought should be presented to the jury and how she thought it should be presented to the jury instead of just calling balls and strikes. When he was asked if he had any words for Cannon, he said, well, don't try to put your thumb on the scale. Let the evidence get before the trier of fact in a fair way and in a partial way. And he added, he said, I do not feel that this judge was an impartial judge. Now, you may say, well, what about the prosecutor? What did the prosecutor say? Well, Prosecutor Brennan, he hasn't said anything. He's just been quiet about it. And the prosecutor who prosecuted the first case, Michael Morrissey, he said the jury has spoken. That's all he said about it all. So now we know what a lot of people have said about this trial. But let me ask you, what are you saying now? After the trial is over and after the verdict has been rendered, what do you really think happened to John O'Keefe? One of the jurors came forward and said that he thought not only was there reasonable doubt, he thought Karen Reed was innocent. You see, there's a difference between being not guilty and being innocent. What about you? Do you think she's innocent? What say ye at this point? Now, if you want to know how I feel about it, go back to the last podcast. I told you that I believed certain things happened to John O'Keefe, and I said what those things were. I also predicted that the jury would come back with not guilty on these two major accounts and would convict her on DUI or OUI, as they call it there. That's what I predicted. That's what took place. I also told you what I thought happened to John O'Keefe, what really happened. What do you think really happened to John O'Keefe? After hearing from these people who have spoken in the aftermath of the trial, what do you think? Love to hear about it. Reach out to me with a shout-out, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Hey, don't forget to join James Buckland and I in the middle of the week on our YouTube channel. We're going to talk about this case, going to go over the things that we've talked about today, and even add some more to the context. So, until this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster, reminding you, be safe, be alert. For the life you save, it may be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. We would like to thank our sponsor, the Peacemaker Network, and also encourage you to support the first responders, military, and law enforcement personnel by contributing to the Peacemaker Network. That's peacemakernetwork.com. peacemakernetwork.com. You can also support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel, tag @CharlieCrimebuster. And once you arrive there, click the subscribe button. By doing so, you'll be notified each time we drop one of our shows. Another more convenient way for you to listen to our podcasts are for you to say to your smart speaker, play Charlie Crimebuster. If you have comments or suggestions, we would love to hear from you. So please send them to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Or you may call or text us at 407-917-2211. That's 407-917-2211. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charlie Crimebuster.